Hello and welcome to the Beneficiary Mitigation Plan Update webinar. I'm Wes Fitzgibbons. We've put together a short presentation to provide updates on the VW Trust program in Missouri and gather feedback for our next steps. This presentation will cover some background information on the program, including the current status, discuss updating the Beneficiary Mitigation Plan, and provide a link to a survey where you can give us some feedback. The purpose of this presentation is to update stakeholders on the status of the Beneficiary Mitigation Plan and solicit input for updates to the BMP going forward. Stakeholder input is the backbone of the VW Trust funding program, and we want to make sure we stay on track with your expectations for it. Back in 2015, Volkswagen admitted to using emissions cheating software in their diesel vehicles. As part of a settlement, they created a nearly $3 billion trust fund to mitigate excess emissions their vehicles caused. Missouri received approximately $41 million based on the number of affected vehicles sold and operated in the state. The settlement also specifies 10 specific types of projects that the fund can be used for, mostly large diesel engine replacements. More details on the background of the VW Trust funding program can be found on our website. In order to access the funds, the state submitted a plan which had to include certain information, including our overall goal, which types of projects we planned on funding, and how much we planned on spending on them, as well as information about air quality benefits expected from use of the funds. This plan is called the Beneficiary Mitigation Plan, or BMP, and we worked closely with stakeholders over the course of 2018 to develop the plan. The current BMP is posted on our website at the link on this slide. The overall goal stated in the BMP is to reduce nitrogen oxide emissions from vehicles. We heard from stakeholders through meetings across the state and multiple online surveys that these additional goals were also important for the available funding allocated to Missouri, and so these goals were also included in the plan. These next couple slides will showcase some of how the program has been going so far. To date, we've received over 450 applications across all of the funding categories, and we've awarded a little more than half of the allocation to vehicle replacements. By far, the most applications have come from the school bus category and government truck category. The DRA category has significant overlap with those two categories, and a lot of the applications submitted under DRA were also for school bus and government truck projects. By contrast, we've received only 15 applications for the transit bus, locomotive and marine, and airport and cargo handling projects combined. Based on this graph, we can see the interest in the funding program is coming primarily from the government truck and school bus categories. Although we have received applications in all categories, the transit bus, locomotive and marine, and airport and cargo handling categories have the least number of applications, which indicates much less interest. On this slide, you can see the results from a national scale. This graph is slightly different from the one on the previous slide, but you can see that our state results line up pretty well with the national numbers. Namely, school bus projects are the most popular, and the three categories we've seen the least applications for in Missouri are also the least applied for at the national level. Comparing the graph and the Missouri graph on the previous slide, we can see that we're seeing similar interest with what other states are experiencing. In this slide, we're looking at the overall emissions reduction goal for the funding. This graph looks complicated, but the takeaway from it is that we're meeting our emissions reduction goals as of the most recent application period. The two red lines are the upper and lower goals set for each category, which were determined by estimating how many projects exist in the state and how much emissions reduction each project would achieve on average. As you can see, some categories are far exceeding their expected benefit, and most are fairly close. Notably on this graph, you can see that the three lowest applied for categories, the transit bus, locomotive and marine, and airport and cargo categories, actually account for quite a lot of emissions reduction relative to how few applications we've received. The non-government truck category accounts for a majority of emissions reduction. You may also notice that the government truck and school bus categories account for relatively few emissions reductions, though they are both at or near their goal. The good news here is that we're meeting our emissions goals, as you can see on the bar at the far right of the graph. Moving forward with that in mind, we think there is room to focus on other goals listed in the BMP. The chart on this slide, which describes how we split up the $41 million, is a familiar sight for most of our presentations and the current BMP. The chart shows how much is allocated to the 8 funding categories and also includes a contingency measure for redistributing unspent funds to the 3 categories at the top. The text of this contingency is provided at the top of the slide. That contingency measure was based on stakeholder interest in the top 3 categories. Unfortunately, as you've seen, the program has not received enough applications to spend the funds in the transit and shuttle bus category, which is one of those top 3. We've only received 4 applications for transit buses in the past 3 application rounds and received 0 applications in the most recent application period. If unspent funds are moved from other categories into the transit bus category, that money will remain unspent and be inaccessible to other categories where there are more applications received. So that's our first big topic for this presentation. We need to address the allocation strategy now that we know for sure what projects are being applied for. On this slide, we've expanded the previous chart to show the remaining funds for each category. As you can see, we've awarded almost all of the government truck and non-government truck categories and large portion of the school bus category funds. You can also see from this chart that categories 3, 5, and 6 have spent very little and have a majority of their original allocation remaining. The dearer option category is meant to be spent over the course of 10 years and will not be reallocated. Similarly, the electric vehicle infrastructure category just recently closed its first application period and will not be reallocated. The school bus category is also not intended to be reallocated and may receive funding from the other categories. With that in mind, there's about $5.1 million in the other 5 categories that can be reallocated. For categories 3, 5, and 6, this is for the reasons previously discussed. Categories 2 and 4 are included in this as they are getting close to not having enough left to fund projects submitted to them. In a few slides, we'll discuss some ideas for addressing this $5.1 million. Our second big topic is the accrued monetary interest earned on the trust. Unlike a grant program, this program receives money from a trust fund, which has accrued interest over time. The current BMP does not account for this interest, which totals nearly $1 million as of July 2020. Along with the reallocation strategy, we're interested in hearing how you think we should address this interest money. Do keep in mind that the earned interest is subject to the same restrictions as the other funds. It's worth noting that as we award more of the fund, the amount of interest earned on what remains will decrease, so we can't expect $1 million to be a consistent interest amount. We've come up with and received many ideas already to address the 2 topics in this presentation. On this slide, we've collected some of the suggestions. Notably, these suggestions include split up the remaining funds between priority categories to be determined by stakeholder input, use the remaining funds for a lottery of all project types, use the remaining funds to fund ambulances and fire trucks, which are often not cost-efficient enough projects for the current categories, use the remaining funds to fund public projects. We're also interested in hearing what suggestions you might have that aren't on this list. Like the slide says, we want to hear from you, the stakeholders. The original BMP and all of our category guidelines were developed in consultation with the public, and we intend to continue that transparency with these topics as well. So we want to hear your ideas on how we should address the allocation strategy and the accrued interest. To that end, we've created a quick survey, and we'd like you to fill it out so we can get an idea of how to move forward with the VW Trust Funding Program. We are planning to have a virtual stakeholder meeting by the end of the year to discuss the results of the survey and our next steps. As always, you can find more information on our website, dnr.mo.gov. Just follow the tiles that say Volkswagen Trust. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact us at the email address on the screen, and we'll do our best to get back to you quickly. Thanks for your interest, and in advance, thanks for your feedback.